good afternoon, and welcome to this session, Modi's India. My name is Parmalan, and I'm chairing this session, as you can see. This is not a normal format in that none of the speakers have got any time to speak. After I've introduced them and given a little bit of blurb about the session, I will start the discussion by asking them a few questions. After which, we will throw it open to you for further questions. Time's very tight, 45 minutes, not long to have a discussion on the world's largest or most populous nation. So keep your comments brief and to the point. Okay, let me introduce the speakers first. So to my far right is Lord Magnet Desai, who is the cross-bench peer. He's also the chair of the Gandhi Memorial Trust and an emeritus professor of the London School of Economics. Immediate left is Dr. Alka Segal-Cuthbert, who is the director of Don't Divide Us. Alka has also got a book out on what schools should teach, which is Disciplines, Subjects, and the Pursuit of Truth. Finally, Dr. Zaria Masani, to my immediate right, who is a historian, author, journalist, broadcaster. So give a warm welcome to all of them. If you want bigger biops, please visit the website because there's lots there. So I was in India this year for about 5 months. I went there for work purposes. This year is quite important in that this year India hosted G20. And it was very evident when you're walking along the streets and everything else that everybody had been geared up to making it great, look good. So where I was, potholes were filled, roads were cleaned, lights were on, all matching the colors of India, saffron. And it was really very beautiful and a very pleasant experience. And it was obviously happening everywhere. Varanasi spoke to somebody who was saying that, obviously, it's Modi's constituency, so he would have pumped a lot of money into it. But nevertheless, he was making this guy was making the point that, because of the G20, it's so much nicer. Everything is cleaner and things worked, that kind of thing. I got very intrigued and very fascinated by all of India, really, the country, the politics, Modi, what was going on. And I was following the papers very, very, every day. I was looking, what's changed, that kind of thing. Anyway, my first question really to the panel is going to be on democracy. If you think about it, India became independent in 1947. At that time, and even since then, a lot of people thought India would never survive. People thought it would balkanize, the military would take over, there'll be a lot of famines. Yet, 75 years later, we are still here. It is still here. Very recently, Biden talked about India as being vibrant democracy, he said. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said that Germany and India have got very close links because they both believe in democracy. Modi himself said at the G20 that India is the mother of democracy. So I guess my first question really to the panel is, with the elections next year, how do you rate the health of Indian democracy? Anybody really wants to kick off?
I think India has had elections very regularly since its first election in 1952. And I don't see why there should be any problem. There will be another 2024 election and BJP will win. I think hands down. You can argue with me about that. But the thing is, there is now very interesting, because India has, 20 land provinces, or whatever it is. There are elections in the provinces as well. And often they are not in the same cycle as the federal elections because, they lose confidence in the ruling party and so on. So until 1967, there were regular federal and state elections, and now they have been break up. So Modi has been proposing that all elections should be together. And that's a very big controversy. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? So that's one. But when you compare it to surrounding South Asian countries, very few have managed to have regular elections. Last time, the 900 million was the number of voters. And this time around, it will be more than 1 billion. And there are more than 1 billion people voting with identity cards, all of them. And nobody minds that. And electronic voting. So unlike here, where you wait all night, you get the results more or less within sort of 15 minutes of polls closing. So Indian democracy is all right. It's technologically advanced, and there are about 1 billion people voting, as they will vote in I think April 2024.
I just want to just relay to you my if you like, my apprehensions of Indian democracy from a different point of view. Not so much the formal election arrangements, but for me, what's always struck me in my return to India, I say return because that's where I was born, but lived in Britain most of my life, is more a question of popular democracy. And by that, I mean the kind of, we know that democracy itself doesn't just mean the formal arrangements. I mean, if you're in India, do go to the Teen Murti Bhavan, and where you will see the history of the Indian Constitution from, independence and the writing of the Constitution, Republic, and the history of India subsequently. It's a fantastic, fantastic museum. And for the most moving things you see is the recognition of that generation, which is pre-Modi, but I know it's meant to be Modi's India, but just, I think there's a kind of a tradition that's still there, I think, although I'm not sure if it's as strong as it once was, of a recognition of how important ordinary people, the masses, are in Indian democracy. You'll see that in the records of the discussions that they had there. And for me, I just kind of felt it and feel it very informally, just in my informal measure of taxi driver conversations. It's like, you will find people who are cynical about the political class, but there isn't that deep, entrenched feeling of nothing is possible that you have here in Britain. It's like there's a kind of, it's funny because India's known as being fatalistic in some ways in terms of its culture, but when it comes to social and political things, everybody's got something to say, more or less. If you go into a shop, it'll be like, well, sit down, have a cup of tea. Last time, what do I think about Boris Johnson and the Tories then? Are they doing any good? That kind of everyday, spontaneous living and breathing of political or just general, social, wider concerns is, I think, the blood life of a democracy. And in that sense, I'm still quite hopeful. I think it's in fairly good state. Thank you.
Well, I'm afraid I'm going to be less optimistic than either Alka or Meghnad. Firstly, I think it's a mistake to think Indian democracy began with independence. Indian democracy began in the 1860s, courtesy of the British Raj, who introduced municipal self-government in cities like Bombay, Calcutta, and Madras. And from that grew provincial autonomy, and we had, under the 1935 British Constitution for India, we had free elections, admittedly for a small...
No chance.
Meghnad, please let me make it a case. The 1935 Constitution created an electorate of 30 million, which was 1/6 of the adult population of India. It was analogous to the late 19th century British electorate, which didn't evolve into universal suffrage overnight. So the 1935 37 elections under that constitution had a very vibrant contest between parties like the Congress, the Muslim League, the Liberals, and produced responsible government in the provinces, which might have come to the center if the war had not broken out and if Hindus and Muslims could have agreed on sharing power. Now, coming on to the post-independence arrangements, the Indian Constitution of 1950 was based on the 1935 Constitution, all its reserved powers for the center, which have allowed Modi to liquidate the state of Jammu and Kashmir, to impose central government. Previous Congress governments have done the same thing to other states. That grew out of the colonial British Constitution for India. So the 1951 Constitution was very much based on the 1935 Constitution. The elections have been held regularly. I've witnessed some of them from the inside because my father led and founded the first liberal opposition party to Nehru's autarkic rule, the Swatantra Party, in the late 1950s. It became the main opposition in the 1960s. And then, of course, we had Indira, Nehru's daughter, imposing a kind of attempt at a dynastic dictatorship in the emergency, which, it resulted in many thousands going to prison and the opposition being liquidated, so there were no elections there. But then she called an election to legitimize her rule and was routed. So Indian democracy has produced these sorts of upsets. What I think is pessimistic about the present situation is that there isn't really an alternative government in waiting. We have this monster man, Modi, who, dominates a rather Putin-esque figure, and there is very little opposition to him because you need an all-India figure with some charisma to deliver that kind of alternative, to pull the opposition parties together. There is no such figure at the moment. There was, in Mrs. Gandhi's time, there was Jayaprakash Narayan, who brought down Mrs. Gandhi. So you need a figure who unifies the country, and I'm afraid Rahul Gandhi and the Congress, I think, Meghna would agree with me, are not offering that kind of alternative.
Thank you. I think it'd be useful to pursue the subject of who can actually unify the country. I know Meghna wants to come in on democracy, which you can in a minute, but it might be also useful to discuss, because Meghna started by saying Modi will win. I also think Modi will win, primarily because there is no opposition as such. But Modi is also described as a very charismatic figure, right? He knows how to win people around him. So in terms of unifying the country, one of the things I was acutely aware of was the rising tensions between, different, you had Christians and Hindus fighting in the northeast, or, you had in Haryana, you had Muslims and Hindus clashing. So that kind of tension kind of filled the paper every day, whether it was somebody beating somebody up because they slaughtered a cow. It was quite upsetting just to read all that. So who do we think is going to unify that? Modi comes along and says in his independence speech, he described it that India should be, or is, one family. Somehow there seems to be, it doesn't seem right the way he's characterized it, but perhaps I'm wrong. Anybody?
I'm going to be clarifying things. I'm an academic. The thing about family comes from a Sanskrit thing called Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam means the whole earth is a family. And he ran it for the G20. G20 conference, for the first time, India had the privilege of hosting a G20 conference, and therefore they were very proud and they wanted to lecture the whole world as to how good they were. I mean, countries do this, You don't take it seriously. But I wrote at that time that if there's any one institution which is full of quarrelsome people, it's the family. But that was not appreciated by the people in power. No, I think, in a sense, I know people don't like Modi very much, and He is the first lower caste person to come to power. And he's so lower caste that they go on doubting that his degree, his undergraduate degree is genuine because he did a correspondence course. And these Oxford, Cambridge graduates who run the opposition, I think he is quite amazing. He's a man who, until he was 50, was not in politics. He was in voluntary RSS thing. And since then, he has fought many elections and never lost. And I think, I know people don't like him, but by and large, if you look at India now, not just because of Modi, but because of the transformation which began in 1991 of the Indian economy by Manmohan Singh, Narasimha Rao, India is right now a moderately prosperous country. Okay, I mean, that's also a problem. But think of Europe. India is the size of Europe, okay? And it is that way more languages in Europe has. There are something like 40 political parties in the Lok Sabha. And so it is not, and of course there are differences between Hindus and Muslims and Hindus and Sikhs and within Hindus, between upper caste and lower caste, of course there are. But they're not caused by Modi. Modi did not invent any of this. He may have taken advantage of them, but then so did the previous ones. So I'm slightly more sanguine because, well, I'm not a Hindu nationalist. I'm an atheist. I'm not a religious person of any kind. I mean, we're witnessing how the Abrahamic faiths are quarreling in Palestine and Israel right now. So down with religion. But I think Modi is not really as big a demon as people pretend. It is just that he is not an Oxford graduate.
Okay. Thank you. Doesn't mean Oxford graduate.
Sorry, as an Oxford graduate,
We all have problems.
I have to take strong issue with this characterization of Modi and Indian democracy, because I don't think Indian democracy is only about Modi. It is also institutional. And what we have seen in the last few years, thanks to Modi and his ex-RSS buddies who run the BJP and the government, is an erosion of basic civil liberties. We've seen what's happened. And I think being Muslim in India is now a very unenviable position. All my Muslim friends feel they're very unsafe, they're very insecure, they are characterized as the other. And there is a kind of artificial Hindu unity that the BJP and Modi has created. I agree Modi is charismatic, and there is no opposition figure. Although there are one or two. There's a wonderful Bengali MP called Mahua Moitara, who is a wonderful speaker, very charismatic, also very good-looking, and very much an future prime minister. But there isn't at the moment. And I think the institutions are eroding. The rule of law has been over the last 50 years has been eroded by the corruption of the courts, the politicization of the judiciary, etc. The press is increasingly muzzled and sanguine, completely complacent, and under the thumb of the government. All the sort of commercial contracts to the private television networks are controlled by the government. So there is a kind of control of information and of free expression. So I think democracy is not just about having mechanical elections. It's about having a climate in which people can disagree. I would not be able to talk like this in India. I could end up in prison. I think that is something that happens to people who do. So I don't think it's a very comfortable democracy.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps you'd like to comment?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, some of the things that Zaria's just been describing, it's just making me think, wow, it's kind of very familiar here. and perhaps that's not surprising given the historical linkages of the two countries. What strikes me is that I think there is this tension between, as we feel here, between a country where you have different groups and how you manage that, Is it to be done through pursuing, through granting minority interests, that's been inbuilt into the Indian constitution? But then, how, if you're going to avoid complete balkanization, there has to be some overarching set of ideas and values. For a long time in the post-war period, that was provided by the Nehruist legacy and the kind of ideas of secular modern democracy, however flawed, and even though they were interrupted dramatically during the emergency. But we know, that's kind of up for grabs in Britain, right? And it's also perhaps being questioned in India as well. I think certainly some of the things I've seen when I was last in India suggest to me that I would agree with your description of an uncomfortable democracy, Zaria, because you can see, for example, Modi resorting to the kind of revisionist history of decolonization discourses that we see here. But I don't think he's doing it for the same reasons, obviously, as people here are doing it. There, it seems to me to be much more of a part of the Modi government trying to distance itself from it's more an internal politics thing, a tussle for Congress against the Congress party, and distancing itself from its past in that particular way. I think the press freedom and the lack of opposition is a real problem, but I can't see, Rahul Gandhi is still, it seems to me, very much steeped in the legacy that has been discredited or is being discredited of Congress. And even though they recently won the Karnataka regional election, I think the Congress party did, I don't think that will translate into anything like a hit for them at the next national general elections.
Okay, guys, your turn.
Thanks to the panel, very interesting discussion. I recently also spent much of the summer in India doing a consultancy on developing international news channel. And I do think that the sort of press freedom is a real issue that does need to be addressed if India is going to really move forward as a modern society. I feel that, at the moment, Prasad Bharati does not report on the opposition. Rahul Gandhi does not ever appear on Doordarshan. It is completely ignored as a story. Now, he may not be the greatest politician, that's neither here nor there, but the fact that no opposition appears in the media in India, and as was explained, I think is a problem for a society that is developing. I think the bureaucracy within India, which, a great gift that the Brits gave to India, but that kind of old bureaucracy, which I think was probably very, very important as the country was developing, I can't see quite how that's going to take the country forward as a modern democracy, because I think it is, it holds things back. And I understand Modi's appeal. I understand that, he has the ability to cut through the caste system, which I think was very, very important. And I understand the importance of Hindu nationalism in terms of cohering the country. But I think that there's something more at stake in terms of institutional development and maturity that I think does have to happen.
Thank you. Wait, one next. Yeah. Who else? Can you put your hands up so I know?
Just a quick question. How significant is the caste system in India now? What effect does it have, and what's the panel's view of it?
Thank you. There's a young man there.
Thank you. Should I stand up? All right. I think when you're noting the sort of domination that Modi and the BJP have had in India, one of the most important things you do have to note is the power of narrativization of the narrative of Hindu liberation from a colonial, the colonial exploitation, whether of the British or whether of the Muslims before that. Because recently, after the sort of Hindu victory with the Ram Janmabhoomi and with the building of the Ram Mandir, the celebrations that were done in response to that, there was a sort of very profound sense of catharsis there, especially amongst the Hindu community. They do see it as a sort of liberation from colonial influence. And I just wonder, like, if you do want to try and pursue the ideals of a secular democracy, because the Hindu population is such a significant, the significant majority in India, doesn't that mean that there might have to be some sort of counter narrative that has to be pushed? Not necessarily one that devalues Hinduism in any specific way, because obviously Hinduism still needs to have a cohering force in order to, remain relevant on the international stage. But how do you manage to do that while also sort of like preserving Hinduism, if that makes sense, and not necessarily demeaning it?
Thank you.
Sorry.
Right at the back, there was a hand. And then if you pick one of them, not all, please. One of the questions.
I think Modi, without having the kind of educational background we would have expected him to have as a PM of India, has understood the psychology of the Indian, which is if you can keep the fluff aside and just keep your focus to keep moving ahead, you can just take everybody along. And in that is what he calls a united India, irrespective of what he's really doing in the background, with whether it is the Hindu population or it is the Muslim population. I mean, I come from the country, I've been a journalist, and I do very carefully see the background PR that he does is hugely solid. He's a man of his words, and he's got great, intelligent people around him handling his PR for him. So I think he's got the complete colonial thought process going on in a very silent way. And that is probably also the reason why he has a great control over the media as well. Because for a population like India that we have, it's better to have less information than to have misinformation. Because this is like an imperial mindset. If you don't inform someone, you keep them uneducated. So, I mean, I don't know what the panel would like to say on that.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going back to the panel. They're going to pick up one or two questions, but keep it short, please. I'd like to go back for another round of questions, okay?
Can I pick up on the point about a Hindu community? There's no such thing as a Hindu community and never has been in India. India is a very diverse a set of, you could argue, subnationalities, different ethnicities. I am half Parsi from Bombay, half North Indian caste through my mother. She was totally different from the kind of Hinduism you would get in the south or in the northeast or the northwest. So these were, the idea that there is one set of Indian Muslims and one set of Hindu Indians is, I think, a very artificial construct. And I think Modi has, I think what does work electorally is a kind of sense of cashing in on the alleged Hindu wound, first from the Muslims and then from the British, and therefore the decolonization rhetoric applying to both the British and to Indians, a quarter of the population being Muslim. They're not just a small fringe minority. So I think India has a diversity as much as Europe. So for it to be one country, which is, you could argue, a bit of a fallacy in the first place. Maybe India would have been much better had there been 10 of them.
Okay, Alka?
Well, I just want to pick up on the point made by Doordarshan, and I mean, I would. That's obviously a problem, right? You've got the major state broadcaster not, being impartial in that way, irrespective of the qualities of Gandhi or the other politicians. But what I would question is whether Doordarshan can be seen in the same way, for example, that we'd see the BBC here. Because it seems to me that India has not had that kind of similar, maybe through practical circumstances, time to develop its own kind of middle-class infrastructure and its own institutions in that way that has been suggested. It's been left over from, it's used, I think suggested, left over from colonial times, which may have served a purpose then. And it's very, I don't have any answers to this, but it is interesting. I think the discussion is being had, although it may not be being had explicitly, because there was quite a very well-known book in 1997 called An Idea of India by Sunil Kilnani, which I think is, you will probably know it better than me, but which kind of has presented, if you like, the conventional view and account of India. But there's a more recent book, I think, of 2005, I think it is, by who is it? I've got the authors here, I can't remember their names. Harsh Madhusan and Rajiv Mantri, called A New Idea of India. And the subtext of that is a civilizational republic. And a civilizational republic is very different to the idea of a secular democratic republic. And I haven't finished the book yet, but it does seem to me that there are quite profound moral and ethical questions in the culture that are surfacing, but in a way parallel here. I'm sure these two guys here will have a better idea of where the kind of institution, the source for an institutional renewal or opening up or democratization would come from. I can't really comment on that.
Okay. Do you want?
Yeah. First of all, about the Doordarshan and all that, there are 200 TV channels in India, and it is not like they only have the government sort of a channel to, and the government channel is actually not very good. Modi or no Modi, when things used to happen, for example, when riots happen or when the mosque was taken down, the Doordarshan did not announce it. You had to hear the BBC to find out what was happening in India. So this was under the great Congress regime, and this is not even Modi. So the government censored news all the time. I mean, so don't think that there was a heaven under Nehru, and so anyway, that is trivial. Let me talk about the caste system, because that was a very important question. Because in a sense, caste is a very, very dominant thing in India. As you know, there are the four sort of major castes, and then there are the untouchables and so on. Much through Congress rule, from 1947 to about 2004, more or less, or at least until 1995, leadership of provinces was kept by the Brahmins. Nehru and his daughters and his grandchildren saw to it that not only in Delhi but in regions where Congress was in power, Brahmins were at the top. And similarly, among Muslims, the top Muslims was called the upper class Sayyid, the Ashrafi Muslims were at the top. There is proof during Congress years of 2004 to 2014 that Muslims were socially and economically highly deprived. Nothing was happening to it. So I don't think that one should say that Muslims are very well off and so on. The upper elite was. Then what happened during Indira Gandhi's demise, as or decline, as you're saying, we had a revolution in which a combination of parties got to power, and they passed a report, they commissioned a report as to where the backwardness and deprivation comes from among Hindus. And they've shown that it is linked to the caste system, that those who are in the backward castes, who are not the top three, but other backward classes and so on, they were the most backward economically and politically. So that led to a revolution. That led to some new parties springing up, which were led by what is called OBCs, other backward castes, and Dalits. The untouchables came on. So Indian politics was transformed by a variety of parties arising, which are all caste-based. And so caste, especially lower caste, as a dynamic force, has emerged in India in the last 50 years.
Thank you. Okay, last round of questions. I can get 2 or 3, so please put up your hands.
It feels like the discussion so far has been on more social and civil liberties. But thinking back to the last election where in states where communist parties had historically had some sway, so Kerala and Kolkata, at least at a state level, there were coalitions between the BJP, which is, I would say, more towards the right of the economic striatum. In terms of opposition, do you think from an economic perspective, it is less that there doesn't exist opposition and more that people have, kind of banded with the BJP given the force of Modi? And that is actually what will lead to a lack of diversity in ideas.
Okay, thank you. Any other? Yep, over there, right at the back. And then we'll get our guys to come in, right?
As I understand it, Modi came to power with the rallying cry of modernization and in currency, for example, and going digital, et cetera, et cetera. The counterpart or corollary of recent rounds of modernization in the West, I would say, has been increasing levels of cynicism about public affairs and the political life in the way that we experience it and in the way in which we look upon each other. In my, I have to say, fleeting visits to India in the past, I've been pleased to see what I encountered as an absence of cynicism. But Modi's modus operandi, to me, does seem to be cynical in the extreme. And for all the talk of indigenous philosophy and civilization and Hindu nationalism and all the rest of it, does the panel think that, at least to some significant extent, what Modi is implementing is actually an import of Western-bred cynicism?
Okay, right. I can take you both. You keep it really short. So the one who hasn't spoken, James, if...
Toilets, not temples. That's what Modi said, I think in 2015. Whatever happened to that?
You did institute it.
And can I just finish? Can I finish, my lord?
Yeah, all right. James.
Thank you. And the second thing is, one of the things you find when you talk to Indian young people is how many illusions attach to them in the idea of a startup nation. They're infatuated by Harvard, infatuated by digital things, and they believe the future's theirs. Demographically, they're right. Are they right rationally?
Okay. You've spoken, so keep it short, right? Really quick.
Very quick. I was struck by the point that you made. India is an enormous continent. It's not really you could say it's not really a country. Is there any mileage in the idea of dividing that continent into separate countries?
Oh. Okay. All right. All right. Megnad, shush. Right. Alpha, do you want to speak?
Yeah, sorry.
This is final, okay? I'm really sorry, but there's lots of interesting points for thought.
Okay, I'll try and be really brief. The thought of another partition just fills me with despair. Just put that out there. Toilets, not temples. Yes, but, and the but is that in some places in India where I spoke to people who lived there or who had connections with very rural areas, the problem was the toilets were there, they were being built, but the people who lived there were not using them as toilets. They were using them to store the grain, because for them the most important thing was to have somewhere dry and safe for the grain, and they could do their other business as tradition, they've done so for years. So that shows me that, also this is a lesson I think really India really needs to learn, because this is you see this also in, say, like Chandigarh, the place in Chandigarh, which was Nehru's perfect, his idea to, after the loss of Lyallpur, I think it was, wasn't it, and Lahore in under partition. The idea was to build a super modern, rival capital, and brought in Le Corbusier and his brother and everything. And I mean, it doesn't work, right? It really does not work. That it's It's kind of has some good things going for it, but it doesn't, because it's been a modernity and a set of standards and ideas that have been imposed without any consideration of the local context. And I think that's, and the question is it India importing cynicism? Well, I mean, as India grows as a world player and makes more connections, there's obviously going to be a cross-connection of cultural ideas. That's just going to be a spontaneous thing. And my really hope is that it doesn't export the cynicism. It might be in some respects, but I really hope it can keep some of its own tradition, particularly with relation to popular democracy and taking morality and ethics more seriously. If it could do that, it could really, and combined with the technological growth, it could teach the West a thing or two.
Thank you.
I just want to make a quick point about this idea of more partitions or less, or more diversity, which you very intelligently picked up on. I want to refer to something called the Cabinet Mission Plan, which would have avoided the first partition of India and would have replaced it with a loose confederation based on autonomous provinces, unpartitioned Bengal, unpartitioned Punjab. And I think this would have been a much more rational and coherent model, which the Muslim League reluctantly accepted. The Congress with Nehru shot down. Had that happened, and had there been power sharing in a loose confederation, I think India could have avoided balkanization or some of the more totalitarian systems that have emerged.
Thank you. Final word then?
No, first of all, about the toilets. It's an interesting thing. Modi, being from the lower caste, actually knew about how people shit in India. And we had the result that malnutrition among children occurs not because they didn't have enough to eat, but there were so many insects and diseases that they could not retain food inside. So the key was not outside defecation, but built toilets. And there have been hundreds of thousands of toilets built. It is not actually a cynical thing. The man actually cared about cleanliness. The man actually cared about the fact that women have to have open fires and basically they get cancer from the smoke. So he asked about subsidized gas cookers. So it's okay, he may be a monster, but he's a monster who actually knows how ordinary people live, because he was an ordinary person whose father was just a tea stall owner. He didn't go to Oxford and Cambridge. Anyway, but to come to the idea of many nations, I have consistently over the last 30 years said that India is a collection of nations. Nobody likes it. India is a multinational collection of nations, like Europe is. And already from one India, there are three: Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India. And the one big drive in Indian nationalism is no further breakup. Yeah. And you have to say that, in a sense, the strongest thing. Now, obviously, there is no single story of why India is a nation. I blame Queen Victoria for this. She made it a single nation. But anyway, basically, India could easily break up. The South is different from the North, and so on. And the whole idea in Indian politics is, let us not break up any further. Look at what happened to Pakistan, and let not that happen to us. Which is why the Hindu nationalist argument has won over. And the whole secular socialism has lost.
Right, please clap. Okay. Really sorry for the short time, but that is the end. We'll see what happens next year. I'm sure Modi will win, but the discussion can continue outside.